The dust cloud rose like a wall of death behind the stampeding cattle, and Sarah Tucker knew with absolute certainty that she was about to die. She had been walking back from the general store, arms full of fabric and thread, when the earth beneath her feet began to tremble, and by the time she looked up, 2,000 head of longhorn were barreling straight toward her with nowhere to turn, no building close enough to reach, nothing but open prairie stretching endlessly in every direction except the one that mattered. The year was 1882, and Tucumcari, New Mexico, was still more promise than reality. A collection of weathered buildings scattered across the high desert plain where the railroad was supposed to come through someday soon. Sarah had only been in town for 3 months, having come west after her father died back in Missouri, leaving her with nothing but debts and the address of a distant cousin who ran a boarding house out here in the territory. She was 22 years old, and she had survived poverty, loss, and the brutal journey across half the country in a cramped stagecoach, only to find herself frozen in the middle of the dusty street with thunder bearing down on her and her legs refusing to move. Then something hit her hard from the side, knocking the breath from her lungs and sending the fabric flying from her arms. Strong arms wrapped around her waist, and she felt herself being lifted completely off the ground as a horse surged beneath them both. The world became a blur of motion and noise, the bellowing of cattle, and the pounding of hooves so loud she could not hear herself scream. She clutched at the arms holding her, felt the solid warmth of a body pressed against her back, smelled leather and sweat and horse and something else, something clean like sage after rain. They cleared the edge of the herd by mere seconds, the horse launching them up onto the wooden sidewalk in front of the saloon as the cattle swept past like a living river of horn and hide. Sarah felt the cowboy's chest heaving against her back, his arms still locked tight around her middle, and for a long moment neither of them moved, just sat there on the horse watching the stampede flow past, feeling the sidewalk shudder beneath the animal's hooves. When the last of the herd had passed and the dust began to settle, the arms around her loosened, and a voice spoke near her ear, rough and breathless. "You all right, miss?" Sarah nodded, then realized she was shaking too hard for him to feel it. "Yes," she managed. "Yes, I think so." He dismounted first, then reached up to help her down, and when her feet touched the ground her knees buckled. He caught her easily, steadying her with hands on her shoulders, and she finally got a good look at the man who had saved her life. He was tall and lean, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of whiskey in firelight. His dark hair curled slightly where it touched his collar, and a few days' worth of stubble shadowed his jaw. He could not have been much older than she was, perhaps 25 or 26, but his eyes held the kind of weariness that came from hard living. A silver star was pinned to his leather vest, dulled with age and wear. "You sure you are all right?" He asked again, his voice gentler now, and Sarah realized she was staring. "I am sorry," she said quickly. "Yes, I am fine, thank you, you saved my life." He shook his head slightly, a faint color rising in his cheeks. "Just happened to be close by. Samuel Tate, deputy marshal." He touched the brim of his hat, a gesture that seemed automatic. "Sarah Tucker," she replied, and watched something flicker in his eyes at the coincidence of their shared initials. "I am staying at the Morrison boarding house." "I know Mrs. Morrison," Samuel said. "She is good people." He glanced back at the street where her packages lay scattered and trampled in the dirt. "Looks like you lost your things, though. Let me help you gather what is salvageable." Together they walked back into the street, now empty except for the settling dust and the distant sound of cowboys trying to regain control of the herd. Most of Sarah's purchases were ruined, ground into the dirt by hundreds of hooves, but Samuel helped her salvage a few yards of calico that had somehow escaped the worst of it. "What caused the stampede?" Sarah asked as they worked. Samuel's jaw tightened. "Couple of ranch hands got drunk and thought it would be funny to fire their guns near the holding pens. They will be spending tonight in jail, and their boss will be paying for any damages." He looked at her seriously. "You were lucky, Miss Tucker. I have seen what happens when someone gets caught in a stampede. It is not pretty." Sarah felt the fear catch up with her then, delayed but no less powerful, and her hands began to shake again. Samuel noticed immediately and took the dirty fabric from her, setting it aside before guiding her to a bench outside the mercantile. "Sit down," he said firmly. "Put your head between your knees if you feel faint. It is natural to feel it after, once the danger has passed." She did as he instructed, grateful for his straightforward manner, for the lack of fuss or dramatics. After a few deep breaths, the world stopped spinning and she was able to sit up again. Samuel had disappeared briefly and now returned with a cup of water, which she accepted gratefully. "Thank you," she said again, knowing the words were inadequate but having nothing else to offer. "No need to keep thanking me," Samuel replied, but he smiled slightly when he said it, and Sarah felt something warm unfurl in her chest. "Where were you headed before all this happened?" "Just back to the boarding house," Sarah said. "I was buying fabric to make curtains for my room. Mrs. Morrison has been very kind, but the windows look so bare." Samuel nodded. "Tell Morrison to put the cost of replacing your fabric on the town's account. Those cowboys were disturbing the peace, and you suffered damages as a result. It is the least we can do." Sarah started to protest, but he held up a hand. "I insist, Miss Tucker. Consider it part of my job to make things right when idiots cause trouble." The corner of his mouth quirked up in what was almost a smile, and Sarah found herself smiling back. "All right then," she agreed. "But only if you let me make you dinner sometime as a proper thank you. I am a decent cook, and Mrs. Morrison says I can use her kitchen." The words were out before she could think better of them, and Sarah felt her cheeks burn. Ladies did not proposition gentlemen, even for something as innocent as dinner, and she barely knew this man. But Samuel's expression softened, and the almost smile became a real one. "I would like that very much," he said quietly. "How about tomorrow evening? I should have these fools processed by then and the paperwork filed." "Tomorrow evening," Sarah agreed, and when Samuel helped her to her feet again, his hand lingered on hers just a moment longer than necessary. The next day seemed to stretch forever, each hour crawling past as Sarah helped Mrs. Morrison with the washing and mending, trying not to think too much about the evening ahead. But she did think about it, constantly, replaying the moment when Samuel's arms had closed around her, the solid strength of him, the way his eyes had warmed when he smiled. Mrs. Morrison, a sharp-eyed widow in her 50s who missed nothing, noticed Sarah's distraction immediately. "So you are cooking for that young deputy tonight," she said, not making it a question. "He is a good man, that Samuel Tate. Came out here 2 years ago from Texas after some trouble back home. Does not talk much about it, but Marshal Henderson says he has never had a better deputy." Sarah's hands stilled in the wash water. "What kind of trouble?" Mrs. Morrison shrugged. "The kind that comes from having principles in a place that does not value them, from what I gather. His father owned a ranch, worked it with hired men instead of participating in certain unsavory practices that were common in their county. Made enemies of the wrong people. There was a fire, and Samuel's parents did not make it out." She gave Sarah a significant look. "He came west to start over, and he has done well for himself. But he carries that loss with him. You can see it in his eyes sometimes." Sarah thought about the weariness she had noticed in Samuel's gaze, the weight of old grief, and her heart ached for him. She understood loss, understood the particular loneliness of being adrift in the world without family to anchor you. Perhaps that was part of what had sparked between them yesterday, a recognition of shared pain. She spent the afternoon preparing chicken with dumplings, one of the few dishes she could make reliably well, and a dried apple pie with cinnamon. Mrs. Morrison lent her the good china, and even offered her private dining room for the evening, a small space off the main boarding house parlor that would give them some privacy. Samuel arrived exactly on time, freshly shaved and wearing a clean shirt, his hair still damp from washing. He held his hat in his hands and looked almost nervous, which Sarah found endearing. "Come in," she said, suddenly nervous herself. "Everything is ready." They sat across from each other at the small table, and for a few minutes there was awkwardness as they served themselves and made small talk about the weather, the progress of the railroad, the latest news from Santa Fe. But then Samuel asked her about Missouri, and Sarah found herself telling him about her childhood, about her father's bookshop, and how she had grown up surrounded by stories, about the slow decline after her mother died when Sarah was 15, the way her father had seemed to lose his way without his wife beside him. "He tried," Sarah said softly. "He really did, but he made bad investments, trusted the wrong people. When he died last year, I found out he had mortgaged the shop, mortgaged everything. There was nothing left. A friend of my mother's remembered that I had a cousin out here and bought me the stagecoach ticket, so here I am." Samuel was quiet for a moment, his eyes on her face. "That must have been hard," he said finally, "losing everything, coming out here alone." "It was," Sarah admitted. "But it is also a chance to start over, to build something new. Mrs. Morrison has been teaching me to keep books for the boarding house, and she says if I keep at it I might be able to find work as a clerk eventually. It is not much, but it is mine." "That takes courage," Samuel said, and there was admiration in his voice that made Sarah's heart flutter. "Mrs. Morrison told me you came from Texas," Sarah said carefully, "that you had your own reasons for starting over." Samuel's expression shuddered slightly, but after a moment he nodded. "My parents died in a fire set by men who did not like that my father refused to join their association. It was meant as a warning to others." His hands tightened on his fork. "I tried to find justice through the law, but the sheriff was in their pocket. So I came west, got myself deputized, and I have been trying to be the kind of lawman I needed back then." Sarah reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. "I am sorry," she said simply. "I am sorry you lost them, and I am sorry justice failed you, but I am glad you came here. I am glad you were here yesterday." Samuel turned his hand over, lacing his fingers through hers. "So am I," he said quietly. "I have been doing this job for 2 years, Miss Tucker, and I have never been more grateful to be in the right place at the right time." "Sarah," she said. "Please call me Sarah." "Sarah," he repeated, and the way he said her name, soft and careful like something precious, made her breath catch. "I am Samuel. Sam, if you prefer." "Samuel suits you better," Sarah said, and was rewarded with one of those rare, full smiles that transformed his whole face. They talked through dinner and dessert, through 2 pots of coffee, until the light outside faded to purple dusk and Mrs. Morrison poked her head in to ask if they needed anything else. Samuel reluctantly stood to leave, and Sarah walked him to the door. "May I see you again?" Samuel asked, and there was vulnerability in the question that made Sarah want to cup his face in her hands and promise him anything. "Yes," she said, "I would like that very much." "Tomorrow is Sunday," Samuel said. "There is a church service in the morning, and after some of the folks have a picnic by the creek. Would you come with me?" "I would be honored," Sarah replied. And when Samuel raised her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, She felt the gesture all the way to her toes. Sunday was clear and bright, the kind of late spring day that made the high desert beautiful, with wildflowers dotting the scrubland and the sky arching overhead in endless blue. Sarah wore her best dress, a simple gray cotton that she had carefully pressed the night before, and pinned her dark hair up carefully. Samuel called for her at the boarding house, and they walked together to the small church at the edge of town, a rough adobe building with a wooden cross above the door. The interior was plain but clean, with simple benches and a pulpit where a circuit preacher stood to deliver a sermon about grace and second chances. Sarah tried to focus on the words, but she was acutely aware of Samuel beside her, the warmth of his arm occasionally brushing hers, the sound of his voice when they sang hymns together. After the service, they joined a dozen other townsfolk who gathered by the creek that gave Tucumcari its name, spreading blankets in the shade of scraggly cottonwoods and unpacking baskets of food. Sarah had brought fried chicken and biscuits, which she added to the communal spread, and Samuel introduced her to Marshal Henderson, his boss, and several of the other townspeople. "Good to see Sam with a smile on his face," Marshal Henderson said to Sarah when Samuel had gone to help one of the older ladies set up her chair. He was a grizzled man in his 60s with keen eyes. "He is too serious most of the time, that boy. Works too hard, does not let himself enjoy anything. Maybe you will be good for him." Sarah felt herself blush but smiled. "He strikes me as someone who takes his responsibilities seriously." "That he does," Henderson agreed. "Best deputy I have ever had, and I have had a few, but a man needs more than work to sustain him." He gave her a meaningful look, then tipped his hat and ambled off to talk to someone else. The afternoon passed in a pleasant blur of conversation and laughter, games organized for the children, and stolen moments when Samuel would catch her eye across the gathering and smile. They sat together on a blanket slightly apart from the others, talking easily now, the initial awkwardness burned away by genuine connection. "You miss Missouri?" Samuel asked, lying back on the blanket with his hat tipped over his eyes against the sun. Sarah considered the question. "I miss what it was," she said slowly. "I miss my parents, miss the shop when it was full of books and customers. But that world is gone. This is my life now, and I think I am starting to like it." Samuel pushed his hat back and looked at her. "I am glad you are here," he said simply, and the honesty in his voice made her chest tighten. "So am I," Sarah replied, and when he reached for her hand, she gave it to him without hesitation. The next few weeks fell into a pattern that felt both thrilling and comfortable. Samuel called on Sarah whenever his duties allowed, which was most evenings, and they would walk together through the town or sit on the porch of the boarding house, talking until the stars came out. On his days off, they would ride out into the desert, Samuel borrowing a gentle mare for Sarah from the livery, and he would show her the hidden beauty of the land. A canyon where ancient people had left paintings on the walls, a spring where wild horses came to drink, a mesa top where you could see forever. Sarah found herself falling in love not just with Samuel, but with the life they were building together, the easy partnership that was forming between them. He made her laugh with dry observations about the town characters, and she made him talk about his dreams, the ranch he wanted to buy someday, the family he hoped to have. They fit together in a way that felt inevitable, like two pieces of a puzzle finally finding their match. But it was not all easy. Samuel's work was dangerous, and there were nights when he came to her with bruises or scraped knuckles from breaking up fights at the saloon, mornings when he rode out to track cattle rustlers or check on reports of trouble. Sarah learned to hide her fear, to smile and kiss him goodbye without clinging, but inside she was always terrified that he would not come back. 2 months after they met, Samuel was called out to investigate a gang of outlaws who had robbed a stagecoach 20 miles north of town. He was gone for 3 days, and Sarah barely slept, barely ate, just went through the motions of her work at the boarding house while her mind conjured increasingly horrible scenarios. When Samuel finally rode back into town, exhausted and dirty but unharmed, Sarah was waiting on the porch. She flew down the steps and into his arms, not caring who saw, and Samuel held her tight, his face buried in her hair. "I am all right," he murmured. "I am all right, Sarah." "I was so worried," she whispered, and felt him tighten his grip. "I know, I am sorry." He pulled back to look at her, his hands framing her face. "I need to tell you something." Sarah's heart stuttered. "What is it?" "I love you," Samuel said, the words rough but certain. "I have loved you since the moment I pulled you out of the path of that stampede, and I cannot keep pretending I do not. I know we have not known each other long, and I know my job is dangerous, but I love you, Sarah Tucker, and I need you to know that." Tears spilled down Sarah's cheeks, but she was smiling. "I love you too," she said. "I love you so much, Samuel Tate, and it terrifies me, but I would rather be terrified and in love with you than safe and alone." Samuel kissed her then, right there on the porch in front of God and the whole town, and Sarah kissed him back with everything she had, pouring 3 months of longing and fear and hope into the press of her lips against his. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Samuel rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "I do not have much to offer right now, just a deputy's salary and a room above the jail, but I swear I will work every day to give you the life you deserve. Marry me, Sarah." "Yes," Sarah said without hesitation. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." They were married 3 weeks later in the same small church where they had attended that first picnic, with Mrs. Morrison and Marshal Henderson standing as witnesses, and most of the town crowding into the pews to watch. Sarah wore a new dress of blue calico that she had sewn herself, and Samuel wore his best suit, the silver star temporarily unpinned from his vest for the ceremony. The circuit preacher pronounced them man and wife, and when Samuel kissed her, the little church erupted in cheers and applause. Sarah felt happiness bubble up inside her like a spring, pure and sweet and impossible to contain. This man, this life, this new beginning, it was more than she had ever dreamed of finding in the dusty little town at the edge of the territory. They moved into Samuel's room above the jail, which was small but clean, with a window overlooking the main street and enough space for a bed, a table, and not much else. Sarah made curtains from yellow fabric, hung dried flowers on the walls, and turned the cramped space into a home. She continued working for Mrs. Morrison during the days, keeping the boarding house books and helping with the cooking, while Samuel worked his shifts as deputy. Their first year of marriage was not easy. Money was tight, and Samuel's work remained dangerous. There were nights when he had to lock up violent drunks, days when he rode out to deal with disputes between ranchers and farmers over water rights or grazing land. Sarah learned to load and fire the small pistol Samuel insisted she keep in the room, just in case, and she learned to sleep lightly, always listening for his footsteps on the stairs. But there was also joy, deep and sustaining. There were mornings when they would wake wrapped around each other and spend a stolen hour in bed, talking and laughing and making love. There were evenings when Samuel would come home, and Sarah would have dinner waiting, and they would sit together at their small table and share the details of their days. There were Sundays when they would ride out into the desert and find a quiet spot to picnic, lying on a blanket under the vast sky and dreaming out loud about the future. "I have been saving," Samuel told her one Sunday afternoon, almost a year after their wedding. They were lying in the shade of a rock formation, Sarah's head pillowed on his shoulder. "Every month, I put aside what I can. Marshal Henderson says there is a parcel of land coming available about 5 miles from town. Good grazing, a creek that runs year-round. I think I could run cattle on it, maybe buy a small herd to start." Sarah sat up, excited. "Really? Your own ranch?" Samuel nodded, his eyes bright. "It would take time. I would have to keep working as deputy for a while, at least until we got established. But yes, my own ranch, our ranch." He took her hand. "What do you think?" "I think it sounds wonderful," Sarah said honestly. "I think it sounds like exactly the life you deserve, the life we deserve." Samuel pulled her down for a kiss, slow and sweet. "I want to build you a house," he murmured against her lips. "A real house, with glass windows and a stone fireplace and a porch where we can sit and watch the sunset. I want to fill it with children and laughter and everything good." "That sounds perfect," Sarah whispered and kissed him again. 2 months later, Samuel made the deal on the land, using every dollar they had saved as a down payment. The property was exactly as he had described it. 500 acres of high desert grassland with a creek running through and views that stretched to the horizon. There was no house yet, just the land and the promise of what they would build together. Samuel bought 20 head of cattle from a rancher who was selling out, good breeding stock that would form the foundation of their herd. He worked his deputy shifts during the day and spent his evenings and days off riding out to check on the cattle, mending fences, planning where the house would go. Sarah helped when she could, riding out with him on Sundays, learning the land as he knew it. It was hard work, backbreaking and exhausting, and there were times when Sarah wondered if they had taken on too much. But then she would see the light in Samuel's eyes when he talked about the ranch, the pride and hope and determination, and she knew it was worth it. This was their future they were building, literally from the ground up. The house came together slowly over the next year. Samuel hired help when he could afford it and did most of the work himself when he could not, cutting and hauling timber, mixing adobe, laying stone for the fireplace. Sarah planted a garden near where the house would stand, coaxing vegetables and herbs from the stubborn soil. And she worked on furnishings, sewing curtains and quilts, buying dishes and pots one piece at a time. By their 2nd anniversary, the house was habitable. 3 rooms with real glass windows, a stone fireplace that Samuel had built with his own hands, a porch running along the front. It was not fancy, but it was solid and well built and theirs. They moved in on a bright September day, carrying their few possessions from the room above the jail. And that night they christened their new home properly, making love on the floor in front of the fireplace, because they had not yet built a bed frame. "This is it," Samuel said afterward, holding Sarah close. "This is everything I wanted, you, this land, this life. I am the luckiest man alive." Sarah kissed his jaw. "I am pretty lucky myself," she said, "considering I almost got trampled to death and instead found you." Samuel laughed, the sound rumbling through his chest. "Best stampede that ever happened, if you ask me. Definitely the best near-death experience I have ever had," Sarah agreed, and they both dissolved into laughter, giddy with happiness and possibility. Samuel kept his deputy position for another year, wanting to ensure they had a financial cushion before he committed to ranching full-time. The herd grew slowly but steadily, and Sarah proved to have a knack for the business side of things, keeping detailed records of every cow, every calf born, every expense and sale. She also discovered she loved the physical work of the ranch, the rhythm of tending animals and land, the satisfaction of seeing things grow and thrive under her care. When Sarah realized she was pregnant, in the spring of their 3rd year of marriage, she was both thrilled and terrified. They were still establishing the ranch, still working constantly to make ends meet, and she worried about adding a baby to the mix. But Samuel was overjoyed, his face lighting up when she told him, his hands immediately going to her still flat stomach. "A baby," he said wonderingly. "Sarah, we are going to have a baby." "We are," she confirmed, and then she was crying and laughing at the same time, and Samuel was holding her, rocking her gently. The pregnancy was difficult. Sarah continued working as long as she could, but the desert heat was brutal that summer, and she struggled with sickness and exhaustion. Samuel hovered over her constantly, worrying, trying to do everything himself so she could rest. Marshal Henderson finally told Samuel to quit the deputy job and focus on his family, that he had more than earned his release, and Samuel agreed with relief. Their son was born in December of 1885, during a cold snap that left frost on the windows and ice in the water troughs. The labor was long and hard, attended by Mrs. Morrison and the town doctor, and there were moments when Sarah was sure she would not survive it. But finally, after 18 hours, their baby came into the world squalling and red-faced and perfect. "A boy," Samuel said, his voice choked with emotion. He held the tiny bundle with infinite care, staring down at his son with wonder. "Sarah, we have a son." "What should we name him?" Sarah asked, exhausted but happy. Samuel looked at her, then back at the baby. "James," he said softly. "James Samuel Tate, after both our fathers." "If that is all right with you." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "It is perfect," she whispered. Little James grew strong and healthy, a happy baby with Samuel's dark hair and Sarah's blue eyes. The ranch continued to thrive, the herd growing year by year, and slowly but surely they built the life they had dreamed of. Samuel added rooms to the house as they could afford it, and Sarah filled them with warmth and love, making a real home out of wood and adobe and sheer determination. When James was 2, Sarah became pregnant again, and this time the pregnancy was easier. Their daughter, Elizabeth, was born on a warm spring morning, coming into the world much faster than her brother had. She was tiny and delicate, with a head full of dark curls, and Samuel fell in love with her instantly. "I am outnumbered now," he said, sitting on the bed with Sarah and both children, James tucked under one arm and Elizabeth cradled carefully in the other. 3 against 1. "You love it and you know it," Sarah said, and Samuel grinned. "I really do," he admitted. Life settled into a new rhythm, defined by the needs of children and cattle, the changing seasons, the slow accumulation of prosperity. Samuel proved to be an excellent rancher, with an eye for good stock and a talent for negotiation that served them well. Sarah managed the household and helped with the business, and together they built something real and lasting. The children grew. James became his father's shadow, following Samuel everywhere, learning to ride and rope and work cattle. Elizabeth was quieter, more bookish, reminding Sarah of herself at that age. Sarah taught her daughter to read using the few books they owned, and Elizabeth devoured every word, always hungry for more stories. When James was 5 and Elizabeth 3, Samuel surprised Sarah by commissioning a proper barn to be built, a large structure with room for horses and equipment and storage. It was an extravagance they could finally afford, a symbol of how far they had come. "Do you remember when we had nothing but a piece of land and 20 cows?" Sarah asked Samuel one evening as they stood together watching the sunset from their porch, the children playing in the yard. "I remember," Samuel said, his arm around her waist. "I remember being terrified we would fail, that I would not be able to give you the life I promised." "You gave me more than you promised," Sarah said quietly. "You gave me everything." Samuel turned to face her, his eyes serious. "No," he said, "you gave me everything. You took a chance on a broken man with nothing to offer but hard work and hope. You built this life with me, Sarah. You made it possible." Sarah reached up to cup his face. "We made it possible," she said. "Together." Samuel kissed her, and it was like the first time, full of love and promise and the bone-deep certainty that they were exactly where they were meant to be. Over the next several years, the ranch continued to prosper. They expanded the herd, hired seasonal hands to help with roundups, and gained a reputation for quality cattle. Samuel became respected in the ranching community, known as a fair dealer and a hard worker. Sarah involved herself in the growing town of Tucumcari, helping establish a proper school and a library, using the bookkeeping skills she had learned to help other families manage their finances. Their children thrived. James grew tall and strong, every inch his father's son, serious and responsible beyond his years. Elizabeth remained studious, and when a teacher finally came to Tucumcari to run the new school, she excelled in every subject. Sarah sometimes saw shadows of the life she might have had if her father's bookshop had survived, but she did not regret the path she had taken. This life, this family, was worth every sacrifice. When James turned 12, Samuel officially made him a partner in the ranch work, teaching him everything about breeding and management and the business side of ranching. James took to it naturally, showing the same talent his father had. Elizabeth, at 10, showed less interest in cattle and more in books, but she also had a gift with numbers that impressed everyone who saw her work. "She is going to be something special, Mrs. Morrison said to Sarah one day when Elizabeth had helped her balance the boarding house accounts in half the usual time. "That girl has a mind like a steel trap. She gets it from her father," Sarah said proudly. "He never forgets a face or a figure. She gets it from both of you, Mrs. Morrison corrected. "You are both smart people who were given a chance and made the most of it. Your children will do even better." Sarah hoped it was true. She wanted her children to have opportunities she and Samuel had never had, to build on the foundation they were creating. In 1897, when James was 12 and Elizabeth 10, the railroad finally came to Tucumcari. It transformed the town overnight, bringing commerce and people and opportunities that had been unimaginable 15 years earlier. The ranch benefited immediately, able to ship cattle directly to markets in Kansas City and Chicago instead of driving them overland. "Everything is changing," Samuel said one night, watching the lights of the growing town from their porch. "Is that a bad thing?" Sarah asked. Samuel considered. "No," he said slowly. "No, I do not think so. Change can be good. We have changed so much since we met, and it has all been for the better." Sarah leaned her head on his shoulder. "Do you ever think about that day, the stampede?" "All the time," Samuel admitted. "I think about what would have happened if I had been 5 seconds slower, if I had been anywhere else. I think about how close I came to never knowing you, never having this life." He tightened his arm around her. "It scares me sometimes, how much hangs on random chance." "It was not chance," Sarah said firmly. "It was fate. We were meant to find each other." "You really believe that?" Samuel asked. "I do," Sarah said. "I believe some things are just meant to be, and we are one of them." Samuel kissed the top of her head. "Then I believe it too," he said softly. As their children grew older and more independent, Samuel and Sarah found themselves with more time together. Time to remember what it had been like when they were newly married and could not keep their hands off each other. They would steal moments alone, riding out to check on the far pastures and finding excuses to stop and be together. Their love had matured and deepened over the years, becoming something richer and more complex than the first flush of passion, but no less powerful. When James turned 16, he asked permission to court a girl from town, the daughter of the mercantile owner. Samuel and Sarah gave their blessing, pleased that their son had found someone kind and sensible. When Elizabeth turned 14, she announced that she wanted to go to Santa Fe to attend a boarding school that would prepare her for university. And though it broke Sarah's heart to let her go, she and Samuel agreed it was the right choice. "Our babies are growing up," Sarah said sadly the night after they had put Elizabeth on the train. "They are," Samuel agreed. "But that is what we raised them to do. We gave them roots and wings. Now we have to trust that we did a good job." Sarah nodded, but she still cried quietly against his shoulder, mourning the passage of time even as she was proud of what they had built. James married his sweetheart when he was 19, and they built a small house on the ranch property, close enough to help with the work but far enough for privacy. A year later, they gave Samuel and Sarah their first grandchild, a baby girl named Rose. Holding her granddaughter for the first time, Sarah felt the circle complete, felt the continuity of life stretching forward. Elizabeth came home from boarding school at 19 with a teaching certificate and a passion for education. She took over the Tucumcari school, bringing new methods and ideas, and became beloved by her students. She never married, claiming she was too busy and too independent, but Sarah suspected there had been a heartbreak in Santa Fe that Elizabeth did not talk about. She did not push. Her daughter would share if and when she was ready. As the new century approached, Samuel and Sarah found themselves entering a new phase of life. They were only in their early 40s, still healthy and active, but the ranch was well established now, running smoothly under James's capable management. They had grandchildren to dote on, Elizabeth's teaching to be proud of, and a community that respected them. They had built something lasting, something that would continue after they were gone. On a warm evening in June of 1899, Samuel surprised Sarah by taking her back to the spot where they had picnicked on that first Sunday, all those years ago. The cottonwoods by the creek had grown, providing more shade, and the grass was thick and green from spring rains. "Why are we here?" Sarah asked, curious. Samuel spread a blanket and pulled her down beside him. "Because 17 years ago, I sat here with you and thought I had never met anyone so beautiful or brave. Because I knew even then that I was going to marry you, that you were going to change my entire life. I wanted to come back here and tell you that I was right. About all of it." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. "Samuel, let me finish," he said gently. "Sarah, you have given me everything. You have given me love and children and a home and a purpose. You have made me better than I ever thought I could be. And I wanted to come back here to where it all started and tell you that I would do it all again. Every moment, every struggle, every triumph. I would choose you every single time." Sarah was crying openly now, and Samuel wiped her tears away with his thumbs. "I love you," she said. "I love you so much, Samuel Tate." "I love you too," Samuel replied, "always and forever." They made love there by the creek, slow and tender, celebrating 17 years of marriage and partnership and enduring love. Afterward, they lay wrapped in each other's arms, watching the stars come out overhead, talking about everything and nothing. "Do you have any regrets?" Sarah asked. Samuel was quiet for a moment. "I regret that my parents did not get to meet you to know our children. I regret the years I spent angry and bitter before I came here. But I do not regret anything that happened after I pulled you out of the path of that stampede, not one single thing." "Neither do I," Sarah said. "Even the hard parts, because they brought us here." They stayed by the creek until the moon rose, then rode home together through the silver darkness, hands linked, hearts full. The years continued to pass, bringing changes and challenges and joys. More grandchildren were born, and James proved himself a worthy successor to Samuel's work. Elizabeth eventually did marry, to a circuit judge who appreciated her intelligence and independence, and they settled in Tucumcari to be near family. The ranch prospered, and the town grew around it, becoming a real city with churches and schools and businesses. Samuel and Sarah aged gracefully, their hair going gray, their faces lining with years of sun and laughter. But their love never faded. If anything, it deepened, becoming the bedrock on which everything else was built. On their 30th anniversary, their children and grandchildren threw them a celebration, half the town turning out to honor the couple who had been part of Tucumcari's history for so long. There were speeches and toasts, gifts and laughter, and through it all Samuel and Sarah sat together, hands clasped, smiling at each other with the same warmth they had shared as newlyweds. "How did we get so lucky?" Sarah whispered to Samuel during a moment when no one was listening. "We did not get lucky," Samuel replied. "We got each other, and we chose every day to keep choosing each other. That is not luck, that is love." Sarah kissed him, not caring that they were in the middle of a party that people were watching. "You are absolutely right," she said. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Samuel and Sarah stood on their porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and purple. Their home stretched around them, filled with the evidence of a life well lived. Children's drawings on the walls, photographs on the mantel, books and quilts, and all the accumulated treasures of 30 years together. "I am thinking about that day again," Samuel said. "The stampede." "What about it?" Sarah asked. "Just that it was the best thing that ever happened to me. Not the stampede itself, but what came after, finding you, building this life. I would not change a single thing." Sarah leaned into him, fitting perfectly against his side like she always had. "The best things sometimes come from the scariest moments," she said. "I was so afraid that day, Samuel, but then you were there, and suddenly I was not afraid anymore. You have been making me brave ever since." "You were always brave," Samuel corrected. "You just needed someone to see it." They stood there until full dark, wrapped in each other and in memories, grateful beyond words for the life they had built, the love they had found, the family they had created. In the distance, a coyote howled and the cattle lowed softly in the pastures. Inside the house, a clock chimed the hour. Everything was as it should be, as it had always been meant to be. Years later, when they were old and gray and surrounded by children and grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren, Sarah and Samuel would still tell the story of how they met. About the stampede and the rescue, about the cowboy who saved a woman's life and ended up giving her his heart. Their descendants would listen, enchanted, understanding that their entire existence traced back to that single moment of bravery and chance. And Samuel and Sarah, their hands still clasped together after more than 40 years of marriage, would look at each other and smile, knowing that some stories had endings so good they seemed like fairy tales, but were actually just the result of two people choosing love, choosing each other, every single day for a lifetime. Their story had started with fear and danger, with a stampede and a split-second decision, but it had become something beautiful and lasting, something that would endure long after they were gone. And that, they both agreed, was the best ending anyone could ask for.